angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
More than 100 healthy young men have gone missing, found dead in bodies of water over the last 20 years, scattered from the Pacific Northwest to the UK, even mainland Europe. And yet, authorities say that they're all accidental. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. A special program today as we talk to an investigator who has been an author and filmmaker who's been looking into the this dark series of so-called accidents. He's the author of several books that we recommend for their in-depth research and expose of the occult underbelly of the United States. Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders. Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity, and Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11, and the New World Order. But today we're discussing his film, which is available through Vimeo, and we will tell you how to access that later in the program. The Smiley Face Killers. We welcome to the program author, researcher, filmmaker, William Ramsey. William, welcome to Skywatch TV.
Derek, thank you for having me. It's great to be here at the Skywatch Studios.
Well, this is a fascinating subject, but one that's really dark. Give us the overview here. 100 victims or more since 1998. Young men, healthy for all intents, I mean, by everyone's knowledge, disappear. So this is a rate of 5 per year. And authorities are convinced, or at least not convinced enough of foul play to classify these as anything other than accidents.
Correct. And it's been known as the Smiley Face Killers. There were 2 men who wrote a book about the cases. Their names were Jeff Gannon and a Professor Gilbertson. Their book was Case Studies in Forensic Drownings. And it identified that these young men had been abducted and were later found in water. And it's been known, this phenomenon, this type of modus operandi, has been known as the Smiley Face Killers, as some of the cases have a spray painting of a smiley face associated with some of them.
So what are the connecting tissue here that led you to conclude that this is more than just coincidence? I mean, what are the similarities between the victims, the way they were, the way they disappeared, the manner of their disappearance, where they were disappeared from?
Well, this phenomenon is happening all over the world, but these cases all have in common the fact that young, healthy men have been out late at night and have disappeared and have vanished into thin air, later to be found in bodies of water. So that was how I became interested in these cases, due to the symbology of the smiley face. I'd seen the smiley face in Alan Moore's The Watchmen, and it also was
Graphic novel that was turned into a movie later.
That's correct. It was associated with one of the characters called the Comedian. But there was also, he was also in David Bowie's last video, Black Star.
Oh.
And actually the music starts right as the smiley face is shown on the left-hand side of the spaceman's outfit.
I didn't even notice that. I've watched that video, and it's very disturbing. It's very dark. A lot of occult symbolism.
Intensely occult. And the lyrics are very occultic
Yes.
as well. And I believe that was kind of his final statement of his knowledge of the occult. And so that was really what piqued my interest. I hadn't really been following the cases, but then I followed a few cases where I started watching. One was a young man by the name of Joey LaBute in Columbus, Ohio. And I had heard he disappeared. There were other people researching as well. Somebody who worked on a movie with me, a researcher by the name of Jim Smith. And both of us said, if he's found in water, this is going to be one of those cases. And sure enough, about 19 days later, he was found in the Scioto River south of downtown Columbus. And that's really when I really started researching this, probably in early 2016.
So the book that was written by Gannon and Gilbertson, Case Studies in Forensic Drowning, would indicate that these young men drowned in the water. Is that the case with all of them, or were they just found in water?
So there's a distinction. Some, I believe, were drowned, but many were found drowned. Actually, one of the cases, the young man was frozen, and that was out of, I believe, LaSalle. But they were all young men in differing places, but the thing that tied them all together is that young and healthy disappeared, found in water.
Okay. By young, what age range are we talking about?
I would say the cases vary somewhere between 19 and at the high end 28, but I would say the mean age is somewhere around 23 or 24.
So this isn't exactly a target group, a group that you would consider at risk for abduction and
Misadventure?
Misadventure,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would totally agree with that. I think that that's one of these reasons these cases are continuing to happen, is that these young men don't believe that they could be a victim of a serious crime. And they put themselves into vulnerable positions or are associated with people with evil designs, and that's why they're in trouble. So nobody's really given a warning, and I hope that this program, as well as some of my documentary and other interviews, will help warn people to keep their young men safe and avoid, taking drinks with any type of drug or associating with people they don't know.
So drinks with a drug. Now, is that a common thread through these cases?
Definitely. There's many of these cases. The young men are clearly exhibiting signs of having been drugged either with GHB or Rohypnol or some type of intoxicant. And Gannon and Gilbertson found higher doses of GHB in the bodies of some of the victims that they studied in their
Now, what is GHB?
GHB is gamma hydroxy, I think is butyrate, but it's actually found in the human body. But in higher doses, it is basically something that could incapacitate a person, leaving them easily subject to crime. Or basically what it'll do is actually you'll forget the night and slur and have extreme symptoms of being very drunk, really.
So this is a kind of thing you might find in a date rape situation.
Exactly. So I think that interestingly you say that, because I think that these cases are similar in some of the kind of MO as some of these date rape drug cases.
So were all of these victims found, or rather, I should ask, how many of these victims were found in situations where they were out at a bar or club looking for a hookup and were dosed unexpectedly?
I would say over 50% were at a bar.
Okay.
And many of them,
Well, that's still a pretty high percentage of those who were not. I mean, where were some of the other guys found?
they were either at a party, they were either at some type of event, whether it was a music event or a professional sports event. So some of those places, it seems like those big crowds, they're young men who were vulnerable in those situations.
Now, you would think if you were in a situation, and as I recall from our conversation previously, one of the young men found in Boston was coming out of a Celtics game.
Correct.
So you're talking about a crowd of about 20,000 people exiting the stadium at the same time. You would assume that would be a pretty safe place to be at that point.
I think you would assume that, but unfortunately there were two cases that came out of that same arena in downtown Boston. It was a young man by the name of Hurley and another young man by the name of Kelleher. Both were found in the St. Charles River. Both were in a crowd, and so they came across somebody who had evil designs, is my opinion.
Now, how about the ethnic makeup of these young men? Is there a pattern?
I would say the majority of the cases are young white men, and there's a few cases. One is Garcia out of Boston, a Latino, and there's a few African Americans. But I would say the majority, 90% or more, somewhere 90 to 95% are white males.
Now, these cases going back to 1998, again, 100 victims spread across the country. Who was the first victim? Where was he found?
The victim that is referred to as year zero is a young man by the name of Patrick McNeill. He disappeared out of New York. He went to Hofstra University. He was last seen leaving a bar incapacitated. People who saw him seemed like he was drunk. He disappeared. He was later found down the Hudson River in a water treatment facility. And the parents, there was a tragedy, but the parents didn't get the autopsy for 10 years. When they got the autopsy, they found that their son had been tortured. There were scars, and it looked like somebody had taken a blowtorch to him. So it was a very serious crime that the parents weren't aware of the severity of the crime until many years later. And then, in fact, a year after McNeill was found, there was another body found in water in the same circumstances, disappeared out of Manhattan and ended up in that water treatment facility, a young man.
Were the parents of that young man told that it was an accident even
They didn't know. They actually included the statement of the mother in my movie where she says, nobody knows what's going on out there. It's dangerous out there. But once they found out, I think they were horrified to find that their son had been tortured.
Well, yeah. I mean, because that would be hard to classify as an accidental death.
Agreed.
Are the police treating it as foul play, finally?
What's remarkable about the totality of the cases that I've covered is the cases that I've covered, nobody has ever been convicted of a crime. I did cover a serial killer in the UK who was drugging young men, but he left them in a church courtyard. He was convicted and recently went to jail in 2015. Mm-hmm. But that's the only ones of these types of cases where somebody has been arrested, brought to court, and tried and found guilty.
Okay, well, you use the term serial killer, but now if we're looking at a case or a situation where you've got an average of 5 victims a year scattered across North America, the UK, and even Spain,
Europe, Italy.
Italy.
There was one recent case in Thailand.
Okay.
Similar case.
So it seems implausible that we're looking at just one perpetrator here.
Agreed. And I came to the conclusion after all my research that this type of crime is some type of modus operandi that has been shared among people who have this similar inclination. So I believe right now, as of today, mid-March 2018, that there are multiple groups and individuals committing these crimes.
How did Gannon and Gilbertson decide that the first victim, victim 0, was 1998, the case in New York City?
Well, that's a good question. They seem to not find cases before that. Other people have found similar cases. Bodies have drowned. People do drown in the water.
Sure.
I think that this specific MO was a young man, and Gannon keyed into this. Gilbert reached out to Gannon, but they realized in Gilbertson there was a hotspot area too, Minnesota and Wisconsin, where these kinds of cases were happening as well.
Right. Now remember, Sharon and I, on our podcast, PID Radio, noticed this a few years back, and the odd number of young men who were getting drunk at college parties and falling into bodies of water. At least that was the official story in upstate Wisconsin, Eau Claire, La Crosse.
La Crosse, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in the Minneapolis area. It seemed implausible, but then the story kind of fell off our radar. We didn't follow up on it. It just seemed bizarre that a group of people that you would assume to be at the least risk. I mean, there's a reason that most military organizations over the course of human history target young men in this age group, is because they tend to be the best fighters.
Right.
So this is a group that you would assume to be at the least amount of risk for this type of activity.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think that these young men are in a vulnerable place at night after drinking or being in some type of venue. So I think that this is these predators are finding these victims at their most vulnerable time. There was a case that I covered in the UK in the city of Marham where a young man, there was an attempted abduction, and I covered it in the documentary, but he got away. It was during the day, and I counterpoised that with these other cases where it's at night, where they're drunk and not found. So I do think that these predators are at these bars or at these late night areas looking for men who are walking by themselves.
The question is, if you've got multiple perpetrators, how are they perfecting this technique? Only 5 times a year. That's not a lot of practice. And this is not something where you'd want to get wrong more than once if you were trying to get away with it. That and the significance of the smiley face when Skywatch TV continues after this.
The Ripper has claimed another victim, and a new shadow arises in the east. A monster with a ravenous appetite for human blood. This ancient vampire challenges the leadership of Red Wing. A fracture that erupts into civil war. At Queen Anne House, the wedding day of Charles and Elizabeth approaches, but treason within the inner circle threatens to destroy all their lives. The clock is ticking towards a final showdown between good and evil. Who will remain standing? The Blood is the Life by Sharon K. Gilbert. Book 3 of the Red Wing saga, part of this exclusive offer. Get all 3 books of the Red Wing saga, plus Dr. Michael Heiser's groundbreaking novels The Facade and The Portent. A $90 value, yours for a donation of just $40. Call 844-750-4985 or log on to skywatchtvstore.com.
Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're talking a very dark subject here with filmmaker, author William Ramsey. The film is The Smiley Face Killers. William, where do people find the movie? How do they access it?
Right now it's available online on my Vimeo channel. All they have to do is go to Vimeo and type in Smiley Face Killers and the movie will pop up.
Okay.
It's a very long film. It's 3.5 hours, but I think I really tried to go in detail about each case on a case-by-case basis and show conclusively that many of these men were definitely not drowned in the river by themselves. They didn't fall into the river. That something happened to them. They got abducted and were later found. And I show at least 5 or 10 times the police conducting searches in these bodies of water for the young men, not finding them, and then later the young men would be found in the body of water.
How long would they be missing by that time?
That's a good question. Typically, these young men, in most of these cases, they have been missing for at least 7 days a week. And the latest cases that I covered, Dakota James was missing 39 days, and that was in Pittsburgh, PA.
39 days. And his body was found?
He was found later in just like I said, in an area that had already been searched, a water body down a river in Pittsburgh that had already been searched. Actually, it had been searched 2 days before his body was found. And according to people who took his body from the water, he was in very good shape. His body was not decomposed.
So in other words, he had not been dead for 39 days?
Correct.
That's even more horrible.
Exactly. These are terrifying crimes. They're not happening with great frequency, but this, I do believe, and my conclusions in the film are that they are happening, and they're happening in with the same modus operandi.
That gets back to the question, and I started leading in this direction before the break. We've got, based on the evidence, the probability that this is being done by multiple perpetrators, which begs the question, then, how are they perfecting this technique? Because when you're confronting a young, athletic young man, an athletic young man, you've only got, it would seem to me, one shot at getting this right. And if it's not something that you've practiced over and over again, it seems like something that could go wrong and lead to a situation you don't want to be in as the perpetrator, or a situation where you leave some kind of physical evidence that police could follow up on.
Right. Well, that's a good point. I think that the water serves as an evidence destroyer.
Right.
I do think that that's one thing. I do believe that because the police believe that these crimes are accidental, they're not looking into them immediately as a murder, which I believe is a mistake.
So they may be losing evidence. They're not finding it because
they're
they
just
weren't
not looking at it the right way. Like oftentimes when people come on a crime scene, they will tape it off. They will put on plastic boots to make sure they can maintain. In these cases, they're just pulling a body from the water. But I do think that these cases coincide with the rise of information transfer, the internet, the dark web, and I do believe that these perpetrators are, in a way, communicating one way or another through coded terms or things like that the police aren't familiar with, through sites that are associated with or are in the dark web, and I believe that that's why these cases these similar cases are happening in different geographical areas.
You're right about that. The rise of the web, 1998. Sharon and I met via the internet back then, and I looked it up once. Only about 20% of America was online in 1997, 1998. But obviously that number has grown and increased to where everybody is connected to the web now. And
different subgroups of different interests communicate, and some are very dark. You know, some people are talking with their Christian church, but there's the other end of the spectrum, people with evil designs.
And even before that, there were online bulletin boards that you could access through dial-up modems. The smiley face. What is the significance of the smiley face? How many of the crime scenes were decorated this way?
I think that looking back, if I looked at the totality of the cases that I covered, at least 15 had some type of graffiti involved, whether it was a sigil or a smiley face or a mix of them both. Mm-hmm. And that's, I really, when I was researching these cases for the last few years, I wanted to discount the connection of a smiley face to these cases, and I couldn't, because it happened and was associated with these cases in such a glaring way in different geographical areas. And my research of the smiley face goes back Alan Moore and all these other, and we talked about it earlier, but I believe that the symbol has a meaning to it, and I believe that it's explicated in Alan Moore's novel, where the comedian talks about how he can commit ultra-violence in Vietnam and think it's a big joke and laugh about it. And that character, I believe, that sensibility is associated with these cases.
In other words, there's no real point to life, so you might as well laugh at it, even when you're committing horrible acts of violence or inflicting terrible pain on another living being.
Right, there's no consequence, do what you will.
Which is Aleister Crowley's whole motto. What role does the occult play? Alan Moore is known to be, and has admitted, that he is as much an occultist as he is an author. What is the significance of the smiley face in the occult realm?
Well, I believe that the smiley face is associated with like a chaos magic meaning, and I believe that it's used, and it goes back to the acid house environments of England, of the UK. But it's important to see who inspired those acid house, electro, nihilistic music involving a lot of drugs. And I investigate that in my documentary in detail. And I go back to a specific group that uses the smiley face, and I show that conclusively. But also, I show, I believe conclusively, that they're also involved in fetishized behavior.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to go into too much more detail there for viewers, but chaos magic, go into that just a little bit. What is chaos magic for people not familiar with it?
I would say it's a post-Crowley system of black magic, and they take in a lot of different stuff. My understanding is that they didn't like the structure of Crowley's system, so it was something that came up in other books. Lieber Knoll, I think one of the guys' last name was Carroll, and I believe that they had a much more loose system of magic, but they still had their own secretive ideas. And I do believe that these cases are associated with something like that, where there's a desire to pollute the psychosphere, if you want to go that route, like True Detective, or intentionally cause chaos to society.
And this is a line of research that Josh and I got into in the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, finding that Crowley's successor and his personal secretary, Kenneth Grant, took Crowley's Thelema, his magical system for Thelema, and developed it into what he called the Typhonian order, Typhon being the Greek god of chaos, equated with Set, the Egyptian god of chaos. This belief that somehow this chaos god was going to return, that we better be on good terms with him, or at least trying to master whatever power he is bringing back to the earth when he comes back. I think there's some strange coincidences with the modern ancient aliens movement. In fact, the search for extraterrestrial life, SETI, is an acronym which, when you spell it out, is the Egyptian word meaning man of Set, man of the chaos god.
And I mean, it all fits together. So I've talked to ex-FBI agents, and he flat out told me that he believes that these young men are sacrificed to dark gods. So it would fit exactly into what you were saying.
How willing, and you can draw on your research into your other books here, the West Memphis 3 cases, Damien Eccles, and the occult aspects of that case, as well as your research into Crowley. How willing is law enforcement generally to acknowledge the influence of the occult on violent crime?
I would say not very much. I believe that they're looking at it in a very saccharine manner and taking out the occult, because I think that they think that it might pollute any evidence presented at a trial, and they would pollute the jury and distract them from the basics of the case. So I would say that the police are not interested in addressing occult influences in modern crime.
What is the most recent case? I mean, is this something that is
still happening? Well, it's a great question. These cases, there's been cases within the last month in Essex, in UK, Bristol. There was cases in Portland, and cases that aren't even in my movie. So it's still happening.
The perception of the public, we see it through the research of the Barna Group, that most American Christians, people who call themselves Christian, don't really believe in the supernatural. They don't believe the Holy Spirit is real. They certainly don't, most American Christians don't believe Satan is real. How does that differ from the way the occultists view the spirit realm?
That's a great question, because I think that at the very top in my studies, and I studied some of the very top occultists in this documentary, they believe Satan is real. They believe in the chaos gods. They call them by different names. They, like Crowley called Satan Awas, so it's blinded, but it leads back to this idea that they really are Satanists. They're just much more sophisticated. So they believe it. I would say that even like LaVeyan Satanists who say they don't believe in Satan, once you get within them, they actually do. So there's a lot of deception from the occultists about what they believe. And I believe deception is part of their religion.
How is social media helping to fuel this deception?
Well, I actually, in my experience and experience of this movie and writing my other books, I've actually had high-level occultists come and give me 1-star reviews on Amazon. And then I research who's this person's name, and then I find out that they're a high-level OTO member in Portland. Damian Eccles of the West Memphis 3 has used a fake name, Avid Reader, and gone through not just my book, but any book that believes that he is guilty of the crime and given 1 star. So that kind of social media attack is definitely taking place for me.
And what kind of information do they put out? And I'm thinking in terms of the line from the movie The Usual Suspects, which quotes the old French author Baudelaire from the 19th century. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he doesn't exist. What are his minions doing to
the same thing? They're doing the same thing. They're mocking. They're laughing at people who believe that Satan exists. And I've learned that particularly in my experience and seen it happen to other people as well, online and in public forums.
What's the takeaway you hope that people, when they watch the Smiley Face Killers, what do you hope people get, the one message they hope that they get from the film?
I hope that they understand that young men are also in a pool that could be very high risk. And these families that have experienced the loss of their loved ones have been destroyed, wrecked, and I wish and I hope and wish that it would stop and not happen to anybody else. So I would hope that people who watch this would warn all their family and loved ones that this could happen to them.
As many as 100 young men and 100 families, not just here in the United States, but around the world. For the most part, it seems mostly the European world, or a world colonized by the European
capitals.
Just destroyed by not only the loss of a loved one, but the lack of follow-up, the lack of investigation by authorities who are convinced that these young men somehow incapacitated themselves through drugs or alcohol and wound up meeting an accidental end. But clearly in the case of people these young men who disappeared and showed up again after 39 days, and clearly not dead for 39 days, that something else was at work here. What is the role of the occult in it? Well, looking in from the outside through the eyes of a researcher, you can only determine so much. But clearly, there are dark forces at play here, and certainly that's the conclusion of one former FBI agent. The film is The Smiley Face Killers. The director, William Ramsey, also the author of Abomination, Devil Worship and Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity, and Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11, and the New World Order. William, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Coming in.
Thank you very
much. And we
much.
thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.